Bem-vindos a Inteligências Lúdicas, meu nome é Rodrigo Manique, estou aqui com meu brother LP para conversar com o incrível Phil Walker Harding. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be talking with you.
Your games portfolio is quite vast, covering a range of themes from builders in Egypt to digging sites in desert to everyday things. So let's begin our journey through those games, shall we?
Okay. Sounds good.
Do you remember your early gaming experience?
Yeah, well, growing up in Australia, we got most of the games we had were just the mass market American games that came over. So I grew up with, Monopoly, Connect 4, Battleship, Operation, Mousetrap. So I definitely remember playing all those games when I was young. I also remember I think the biggest, earliest influence was when a couple of Ravensburger games came over from Germany. So we got Scotland Yard was the main one, and Amazing Labyrinth. And playing both those, I was probably, 7, 8. I could instantly tell these were different games. Something was different about these to the other games. And I remember seeing the SDJ logo on Scotland Yard and thinking, wow, I can't imagine there's a country that awards prizes for games. So I think I always just had in my head, there's another type of game somewhere in the world. But no, definitely grew up playing lots of games at home. And I'm sure that was a big influence, yeah.
Nice. So quite start. And when did you start working as a game designer? And what was the reason for doing it?
Yeah, so about 2004, I discovered sort of the new wave of German games. So I played Catan, Carcassonne, and Lost Cities were the first 3 I played. And instantly I was like, oh, these are those other games that I remember thinking must exist somewhere. And I was, pretty much hooked instantly on getting back into the hobby. And straight away, I started just dabbling in design. So it just seemed like a natural, fun thing to do. So the first thing I did was I tried to design a 4-player version of Lost Cities because I wanted to play it with more than 2 people. It didn't work at all. Knizia knows what he's doing. So, it just was a hobby for quite some time where I was just dabbling around, making silly prototypes at home. And then after a year or so of doing that, I thought I'd have a go at self-publishing. So I made this little card game, Archaeology. I made the board game version of Archaeology first, and then the card game version. And I literally just handmade these things and started selling them at local conventions and online as just like a hobby. We're talking 50 copies, 100 copies. And I really enjoyed that. And it just very slowly grew over the next 15 years.
So where does your process start? You are a guy that works from theme to mechanics, or you think of the mechanic, build a skeleton of what you want, and then you put the theme on the game, or you dream about it and you.
I wish they came to me in dreams, but no. Usually, every game's different. So. 2 more recent games of mine, Planted and Summer Camp, were both examples where the publisher Buffalo Games came to me with a theme and said, we're set on this theme. We've done our research. We think this theme is going to connect with people. Can you design a game to this theme? So for those games, it was completely theme first, and then me trying to figure out, okay, what's a game in my style that will work with that theme, and what are some mechanisms that'll fit with that. But very often I start a mechanism comes to mind. So Sushi Go was definitely mechanism first, in the sense that I wanted to make a pass drafting game after playing Fairy Tale and 7 Wonders. The theme came very quickly, and then I designed it with that theme, but it was a mechanism first design. So every game's different. It's strange how you have different starting points for designs. Sometimes, like Busy Beaks is a game you can see behind me there. This is a little game I did with my own little publishing company now, and that was art first. So we had this there's an amazing kids book here called Busy Beaks, and we licensed the artwork. And I mean, I had some ideas, but kind of the art dictated the design in many ways. So yeah, every game's different, I'd say.
Very interesting. You just said the game you released, your publisher. How hard is to develop and release how hard was to develop and release your first game, and the process of developing, playtesting, submitting to publishers, and now that you have your own company, how this process has changed?
Yeah, it's almost full circle for me, because I started out self-publishing, so I was doing very little print runs of my own games, but I mean, it wasn't very professional in many ways, but I did have control over the whole process. So I started out like, I can choose the art, and I can choose the components, and I can choose how to promote it. And I did that for, a few years. And eventually I was like, oh, I don't want to do it all. I just want to do the game design. I don't want to be caught up in all the other businessy things. So that's when I kind of fully moved into pitching my games to other publishers. And then I did that for many, many years. And then, as often happens, you go, oh, I kind of miss the thing I don't have anymore. So I was like, oh, it'd be nice to go back to having control over an entire product. And so when Meredith, my wife, and I started Joey Games, that was one of the things I was really looking forward to, is it's like, oh, now I get to, have a say about every single aspect. But it is like 50 times more work to do it that way. And that's why, publishers are so good at what they do, and why most designers work that way, because there's so many business decisions and so many practical decisions that don't have anything to do with game design that you have to make. So it's a lot more work in different areas, but it has been really interesting and satisfying to kind of come full circle back to being able to think about an entire product, not just the game design. Yeah.
Now that you have control of the whole process, which part is the one that you like the most?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the most exciting part is when the actual design is mostly done, and you're starting to apply the art and the final kind of look to the game, because I think that's the moment when it becomes really real. So like with Busy Beaks, the first time I played it with the real artwork, a prototype, but it had the real artwork, that was really great, because like, okay, this game is now born, in a sense, like it exists as it will be, and it feels real to be playing it. I think that moment when it comes together, assuming it comes together well and is how you wanted it to feel and play, that's the most exciting. And it's the same when you work with a publisher. For me, the most exciting moment is when you first see final artwork and final components, and the game suddenly is real, like it exists as a product now, not just as an idea in my head or a prototype. So I still think either way, that's the most kind of gratifying.
Nice. Here in Brazil, in Latin America, people love Bar and Park, Cacao, Gizmos, Sushi Go, Archaeology. I have two. I have the old one and the new one somewhere here. And we see lots of people playing them, having fun with those games, with your games. Some were released, and some others they import, since they are not here yet, right? One of them is Emotep.
Mm-hmm.
Its concept, it's amazing. How easy it is to teach, and although it's easy to teach, you have when you master the game, to do what you need to do while playing with your friends. The concept is amazing of that game. How did you start working on it?
So that's one of my very early games. So it didn't come out till 2016, but I actually finished it in 2010.
Nice.
And it just took a very long time to find a publisher. But so one of my early games where I decided I want to try and make a full board game, not just a little card game I can make myself, but something bigger to pitch to publishers. And the theme was first in this case. And I was just like, I want to make a game about building the pyramids, because I thought it's this ancient mystery everyone talks about. It's always been fascinating to me how it was done. Why don't I try and make a game where you're physically building a pyramid in some way? So I just started toying around with blocks and figuring out how this game might work. And it was one of the, in a lot of ways, it was a happy accident in the sense that I thought, okay, well, I need to quarry stone. So that's one action. I need to load stone. That's one action. I need to send it to the pyramid. That's one action. And very quickly I realized, okay, you have to have a choice of where you send it. So let's have different building sites, not just a pyramid. And I had this structure that just seemed purely logically the simplest way to approach the game. And I just went with this structure and I started playing it. And I realized that there was this really amazing interaction that was naturally in the game, which is, okay, well, we're putting stones on different places and anyone can move them to anywhere. And I didn't, even consider that as part of the design when I first started making it. But it just emerged from the system. And I was like, wow, this is the funnest part, that we get to jockey for position and try and get our stones where we want them and try and get our opponent's stones where they don't want them. And so when I realized that was part of the dynamic that had emerged, I just lent into that and kind of, okay, well, that's the game. And now I just need to come up with different kind of ways of scoring and different effects that can happen. So that was like, as often happens, I think, with new designers, sometimes you just stumble into this cool idea and you're like, oh, I didn't even intend this to happen, but it happened. So how can I make it into a good game? So got lots of help from the development team at Cosmos to just get the final 5% of the tightness of the rules and the scoring. So they were great. But yeah, that's the story.
Lepe, please.
It's my perception. I can be wrong, but your games strikes a perfect balance between being accessible for new players, offering depth and strategy for more experienced players. Is achieving this balance a primary concern of yours during the design process?
Yes. Yeah, it is. It is my primary concern, I guess. So, in most cases, for most designs, from pretty early on, I think, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know fully. I don't remember deciding that would be my style, I guess, but it just very naturally developed. I think when I first started playing the German designs of the 90s and early 2000s, that's what I saw. I saw these games can be taught in 10 minutes maximum. Most people can jump in pretty quick and start playing. But what really struck me was how much decision space there was, especially when you're used to mass market games where there's very little, to suddenly have, a whole island to build roads and settlements and houses on, and a hand of cards I can trade or keep. I just felt like that was what made these games so amazing. It was like I was playing, having a full strategic experience, but in an hour with relatively simple rules. That's what just grabbed me. And I think because I was never that interested in the absolute heaviest games. Mm-hmm. So I never ended up in a game group that was just playing the latest heavy 2-hour kind of thing that was coming out. I was always playing with new gamers, casual gamers, just friends. And it was just imperative to me that the game be quick and simple to learn. And, but also show off what board games can be. So that was always in my earliest designs, I think, what I was trying to do. And it just carried on. And I just think I'm very much someone who wants to just have a broad appeal, in the sense that I want as many people anyone who's interested to be able to play one of my games. Essentially, that's what I would love, that anyone who wants to play can play. And that's probably one of my main concerns designing. So I'm always thinking, is this an intuitive rule? Is this a rule that's easy to teach? Is this a rule that's going to be forgotten? Is this a rule that when you're playing, you know exactly why you would do it and what it might result in. All those questions are very in the front of my mind. Yeah.
I will ask you about one of the most loved games here at home. That is Sushi Go. It's a game that plays well with a large group, with no impact in game length. It's simple to teach. It can be enjoyed by groups of all ages. I played with my 6-year-old, the daughter of my brother. I forget the name.
Niece.
My niece, and played with my mother-in-law. So it ranges from very young to very old with very simply. It's a fast game. It's a beautiful game, and in my opinion, the best card drafting game there is. So, could you share with us? You said you start from the mechanics, but quickly uh, put the theme on it. How was the process of this fantastic game?
Yeah, so I played this Japanese card game came over through Z-Man Games called Fairy Tale, and I played that, which is the first pass drafting kind of game in kind of Euro games that I was aware of. So I played that game, and then not long after that, Seven Wonders came out, and that was obviously huge. And I really loved both games, and I loved the card drafting. So I was just thinking, I would love to make a game in this genre. But both those games, even though they're really simple, like a lot of gamers would say, both of those games are entry level casual games. They're actually both quite hard to teach. So I had many experiences with Seven Wonders where it's like I'm spending 20 minutes to teach the game. We play for 20 minutes, and it's only at the end of that 20 minutes does it click for people what, you have to kind of see a whole game to understand the scoring. And I mean, I love Seven Wonders, don't get me wrong. I love the game. I still play the game. But I was like, oh, there's got to be a version of this that is like 3 or 4 minute teach straight away. You know what you're doing. There has to be. And I thought I want to do everything I can to get out of the way of the main mechanism, which is just passing a card, choosing a card, passing your hand. That to me was the fun I wanted to focus on. And any rules I had to just highlight that fact that that's what we're doing. We're choosing only one card and passing the hand, and we have a sense of what's around the table, but we're not 100% sure what's going to come back to us. So every scoring mechanism in that game was designed to kind of heighten the feeling of tension and anticipation as things move around the table. So that was like the design. And quite early on, I just asked myself, okay, what's a theme that could work? What's something that moves around? And I had a few ideas, but I must have eaten sushi that week, I suppose. And I thought, oh, a sushi train. That's perfect. And so that came really quickly and was a very natural fit to the cards I already had. And the play testing, I did a lot of play testing because even though the rules were very simple to get, the rules were almost done straight away. It was more, what are the scoring cards I want? What are they worth? Which ones do I have? Which ones do I not have? How many are there in the deck? And that was a matter of like extreme fine tuning. So it is when you look at it now, I look at it now and I think, wow, this is a simple game. Like there's almost nothing to it. But I have to remind myself there was a lot of testing, lots of different scoring rules, lots of different card types, and particularly the makeup of the deck was something that took a long time to get right. Yeah.
There is nothing wrong with being a simple game. It's a fantastic game. And how was it to make the transition from cards to dice? And the name Sushi Roll is fantastic as well.
So not long after I did Sushi, I did Sushi Go. The first print run was self-published, and when that started selling, Game Right happened to come across a copy. So Jason Schneider played it. He, for many, many years, was the main person at Game Right finding new games. And he found it and he wanted to publish it. And that was amazing. That was like probably the biggest moment in my career, really, because that is what I was aiming for with that game, was for it to become a bit of a mass market card game. So we're so happy about that. And after about, it was pretty quick, maybe 6 months or a year, when it was selling quite well, Game Right came back to me and said, we want a dice game, if you can think of one. And this is the first time a publisher had ever asked me for anything. So I was like, okay, well, okay, dice game coming up. So I worked for a long time trying to find a dice game. And I actually designed 3 entire games that were Sushi Go, the dice game. But they all worked, but I just knew, you just know sometimes in your gut, this isn't a special game. This isn't great. It's just okay. And I just was very hesitant to follow up Sushi Go with something that was just fine, you know? So I went back to Game Right and I said, sorry, nothing's kind of happened, but I'll keep thinking about it. Who knows? And then years went by, like probably 3 years went by, and it came up again. Like, do you have a dice game? And I said, let me go back to my old designs. Let me see if I can figure something out. And the question just popped into my head, like, what would, a kid who loves Sushi Go want the dice game to be? Like, what would they expect it to be? And one of the versions I had, obviously, because they were dice games, had drafting, like past drafting in them, because they were dice games. They were dice games with Sushi Go scoring. And I thought, no, Sushi Go is the drafting. Sushi Go is the passing. So I was like, we have to pass these dice. And I just said, that's the game. You have to pass the dice. And so then I just designed it from the ground up with that. And it took a while to make it work. But that when I landed on that, I was like, okay, now I have a vision for what this is supposed to be. And yeah, I'm actually, it's one of the games I just feel really happy with how it came out. Like it met my goals. You know what I mean? Like I aimed for something and I feel like I hit it. So yeah, that's the story. And I have to say, Game Right came up with the name, not me. So as soon as they did, I was like, yes, of course, Sushi Roll, yes.
And the gameplay is as good as Sushi Go. What I love in Sushi Go is that it's simultaneous. I don't know if Sushi Roll works as well as Sushi Go for a large group, but it's as fun as Sushi Go. So another hit.
Yeah, it was. There was a part of me that was really disappointed I couldn't figure out how to make it simultaneous, because I would have loved to. But I just think, when you're rolling and picking dice, I just couldn't do it. Couldn't make it work. And I think you at least get to all roll your dice at the same time.
Yes.
So that was my nod to simultaneous play. Yeah.
As Rodrigo mentioned, you have a vast portfolio now, and your themes goes from everyday things like Sushi Go to ancient history, from nature to architecture. But there is so little space for sci-fi themed games. That is one of my favorite themes. Is there a why? And do you intend of, or you have any project of a sci-fi game in your mind?
Interesting you ask. I can't talk about it really, but I am actually working on a science fiction game right now. No, there's no reason I haven't done it. I think I would be, up for most themes, most genres, I suppose. There's no real reason I haven't done sci-fi or anything like that. I guess I am a little bit drawn to more everyday themes and themes that not just have a broad appeal, because that kind of sounds like lowest common denominator, but an appeal that is just slightly like, oh, someone who I'm just interested in themes that people who might not be gamers might, click with. So most people who play board games and video games, a lot of them are into sci-fi or fantasy. Like that's a pretty common theme. So it's an easy sell for the hobby. But I'm always interested in, what's a theme that someone who's never played games might go, oh, I've never played a game, but that theme excites me, so I might try it out. Obviously, Wingspan is the key example of this that everyone can cite, because even though it's a reasonably complicated game and an expensive game and all these things, the theme was so inviting to so many people that it got a whole kind of new type of person, I think, to dabble in the hobby. So that's really exciting. So those themes mostly excite me, but yeah, there is a sci-fi game on the way, I hope.
Wow. Very nice. You told us about the everyday games. Bate-papo, another game design. It is fun to play, really fun to play, and widely appreciated for its accessible gameplay and engaging mechanics. Firstly, why bears? And this question, why bears, it's Lipe's question.
It's a great question. I have to say, this was the publisher's idea, essentially. So I designed the game. You were building an amusement park. So each tile was a different ride in the park. And I pitched it to Lookout Games, and they really enjoyed it. But they came back to me and they said, I mean, this is a common thing that publishers say that I don't think a lot of gamers fully kind of understand, which is they were fine with the theme, but they were like, in terms of the market in Germany right now, there had been a couple of amusement park themed games that had come out recently and they hadn't done well. And so Lookout was like, we just need a slightly different take on the theme. And I was like, okay, like that, like I never would have, I don't know, those sort of aspects of the German game market from over here in Sydney, obviously. So I was like, okay, well, let's talk, let's work things out. In the end, we decided on a zoo theme, which I thought that's perfect. Like it's similar. It means we can like put some cute animals into the game, which is always fun. So I was like, great. Anyway, Lookout decided so for a while it was just a zoo, and then it merged, kind of became a zoo for bears. And when they first told me that that's what it was, I was like, I've never heard of a zoo just for bears. But there are actually some bear parks in Europe. Like bear sanctuaries are a thing there. And you'll go and it's a sanctuary just for bears, and you see bears in natural settings. And I thought, wow, like, okay, that's something I didn't know about in the world, and bears are amazing. So, okay. So that was kind of that was an example of like the publisher changing the theme essentially. And I was happy with it, except the one thing I wasn't happy with was really late in the art process, they added koalas to the game. And every Australian is brought up knowing that koalas are not bears, and that a koala bear is not their name. They're koalas. Anyway, so I said to them, look, I'm going to get raked over the coals for this. Everyone's going to say the Australian has made a game where koalas are called bears. So I said, but they said it was too late to change. And I said, okay, how about we just add a disclaimer to the rules? So there's this cute little paragraph in the rules which says, we know that koalas are not bears, but they're so cute, we have welcomed them into our park. So that was the story of the theme there. So yeah, that was one where the publisher kind of led the theme change. And at first I was like, oh, this would not be what I would choose, and it's a bit strange to me. But it's one of those examples where them picking a theme which they felt would land was a decision that I could never have made for that market. And it has actually proven to be part of the kind of charm of the game, is that people go, do you want to play a game about building a bear park? And that's sort of become part of the fun. So yeah, you never know how these decisions will play out, but that one played out really well.
Nice.
The tile layering and scoring mechanics are so well balanced. Can you share some insights into the overall design process behind creating the game?
Yeah. So I designed a game. So I played Patchwork, as everybody did when Patchwork came out. And I thought, oh, it's always lovely to play a polyomino game. And at that point, there weren't that many. So one of my favorite games is Blockus. And I just love that that game just gives you, okay, here's 25 polyominoes. That's it. Go make a game. So I love Blockus. I've always liked Princes of Florence, which has polyominoes. So I always wanted to do a game like that. And when Patchwork came out, I was like, oh, someone's back on polyominoes. Great. This is the time to have a crack at it. So that was all I was trying to do, to make a 2 to 4 player polyomino game where it was essentially just polyominoes and not a whole other game that just had that as an aspect. So that was all I was setting out to do. Really quickly, I was like, okay, well, how do you get these polyominoes? How do you get them? And I had just put aside a design which wasn't working, where you were building up this city with domino style tiles. And it had the best part about it was the way you collected resources in the game was by covering up icons. So when you covered up a particular resource icon, you got that resource. So every time you played a domino, you were playing the domino, but you're also getting what you covered up. And I always thought that was the best part of that design. By the way, that later became Gingerbread House, that design. But anyway, so I grabbed that mechanism from that old game that I'd put aside. And straight away I was like, oh, this is how we get tiles. We have to place them in such a way that they generate more, and the ones we need right now. So that was how I got there. The other thing I wanted to do, sort of as opposed to Patchwork, was I wanted you to be incredibly constrained in the space you were building into, and that it would only gradually get bigger. Because I think I wanted to give people the feeling of, oh, I filled in a space. Like I filled in the perfect tile in the perfect space. I wanted people to have that feeling all the time, like not just at the end of the game. So that's why the boards build out in the way they do. And I guess the last element of the design is the way it scores, in the sense that every pile of tiles just depletes in its value. So it's just a way, in a way, it's a very gamey, artificial scoring mechanism. It doesn't really make sense thematically or anything. It's just a way to essentially say to the players, okay, you have to race for everything. And you may want that tile, but if it happens to be worth 4 points less than that tile, maybe you'll go the slightly suboptimal route to get more points. So I kind of slapped that on the game, not really being sure if it would work. And it just, much like drafting in Sushi Go, it's where all the tension comes from. It suddenly is like, oh, okay, a solo puzzle is now suddenly 7 different races with depleting point values. And it just felt right. And it felt like it was the thing which could keep the game very simple and allow it to only be about polyominoes, but still have like scoring. So so that's pretty much how it all came together. And that was a design that was a very satisfying design to work on, in the sense that it just, it was a lot of work, but it really just came together. So all those pieces just organically felt right and fit into place.
And it gives a sense of urgency. You have to be fast, because it's captivating. You are creating. If you don't put this sense of urgency, people would be spending more time looking for the perfect fit, but they have to run, because they will, if they keep stalling to get the perfect fit, they will lose the big points. I think it's genius.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. It's also, I mean, a lot of discussion in game design I see happening at the moment is around player interaction. So a lot of new, really popular games, and especially even in the polyomino genre, people will call them multiplayer solitaire and say we're all doing our own puzzle. I don't feel like I'm playing with the table. And then, of course, other people will say, great, like I love doing puzzles. Why not do a puzzle together around the table? What's the problem? This is a discussion I see happening all the time amongst game designers and people who are into the hobby. And I think Barren Park is an interesting example where I wasn't attempting this at the time, but it is essentially a solo puzzle game with no shared space. Like you each have your own board, but the shared space is created simply by these radically depleting score piles. Yeah. And it still feels like your own puzzle. And it is, that interaction is not very direct. But I do feel like when I play Barren Park, I care about what the other players are doing, and I care about the game state in the center of the table. And, I've designed games on many sides of that spectrum, but I think that's an interesting example because it's very much a solo puzzle, but it has this surprisingly urgent thing in the middle you need to keep an eye on. Yeah.
Yeah, the best moment when you fit the small medal where you have the points. Okay, I completed my part of this part here. It's
I'm always thinking, what is the moment in gameplay when the player feels the best? And let's give that to them as many times as possible, which sounds obvious, like make the game fun. But that's an example where it's like, oh, what I want out of a polyomino game is to feel like I finished a puzzle all the time. And so I just wanted to give you as many moments as I could of, oh, that's satisfying. Oh, that's satisfying. Oh, that's a nice fit. That's a nice fit. So that's something, I mean, all my designs, I try and give you those moments. I remember listening to an interview with Susan McKinley Ross, who did Quirkle. This was probably over 10 years ago. I heard an interview with her because I think she's a great designer. And she calls them bingo moments where the player is playing and all of a sudden they go, oh, I just did something really cool. and I get something, or I feel great, or I feel satisfaction. And she's like, she coined that term, bingo moments. And it's something I always think about, like, where are the moments where a player feels accomplishment or satisfaction mid-game? And how many are there? And how many can I squeeze in? So that's definitely part of my process, I would say.
Well, great. I always liked magic wizard stories, and I had the opportunity and the pleasure to teach. And it's a kind of presentation of games from Galapagos Jogos. It's a company which brought this beautiful game spell book. The moment I shrink wrapped and opened it and started reading the rules, and this will be a pleasure to show people. I sent you one of the pictures I have, and I have plenty more. And it was a pleasure to teach. Okay, we played the very first game, which we played the first cards, right? The first magic volumes, right? The pages, and then it was supposed to be played just once, one full game. After the game finished, all people, can we play it again? Can we play it again? Can we play it again? So it's an addictive game with magic. But okay, this is spellbook, and I love it. And people here in Brazil are loving it as well. But as I told you, I love magic wizard stories, and how to deal with magic. And the ones who hold the power is something that we have to bear in mind. With this in mind, what can we expect from Sinister Institute?
Yeah, well, thanks for the kind words about Spellbook. That's really lovely to hear. Sinister Institute, yeah, so that's a new game that's just been announced from Mojito Studios. And so this game, I mean, this is an interesting theme. So theme discussion as well. So for a long time, I've just wanted to make a fantasy quest game for younger players. So, growing up playing Legend of Zelda, just thinking one day I'd like to make a board game where you set off on a journey, you have to discover things and go on quests. Like, I've just always thought I want to make a questing game. And so this is something I've been working on for many years. I keep coming back to it. And it's sort of aimed at younger players, but it gives you this feeling of a larger journey, I suppose. Anyway, the prototype I had for many years was just absolutely generic fantasy. So dragons, knights, swords, just because when you're making a prototype, that's an easy kind of language to grab quickly. Everyone knows what you mean when you say, pick up a sword and stab the dragon. These are all concepts we know. So I just had the most absolute generic fantasy theme on it. Anyway, I was speaking to Mojito and they were looking for a cooperative game. And they said, do you have any cooperative games hanging around? I said, well, I do, but it's a bit of a unusual one in the sense that it's very much about planning together and going on quests together. And they're like, oh, send it through. So they really liked the game, but they were like, we want to do something better with the theme. And I was like, oh, of course. Like, I always assumed there'd be a more interesting take than just generic. The working title was Story Quest, which is kind of a cool name, but it's like the most generic name ever. So anyway, they said, they went away and spoke to their artists and they came back and they said, what do you think about a sort of school for wizards that's a mashup of sort of a Harry Potter situation and a Wednesday Addams school? Yeah. And I was like, I'm listening. That sounds pretty fun. And then, like, what if it's set in a swamp and there's this evil guy who's trying to haunt the swamp with these evil spirits and the kids from the school need to overcome him? And I'm like, okay, that's way better than a dragon. And when they started sending through art, I was just like, this is amazing. So the theme in this case is almost entirely Mojito and their team. But the game is very similar to my original game. It just has this amazing setting, which now draws out way more interest. So instead of being a knight, you are a very particular student. And instead of just having a sword, you have like a way more interesting artifact that has an interesting power. So it's a really good example of how just like a better setting, a little bit of narrative background can really help a game. So it'd be really interesting to see how it lands with people and how the theme lands with people, because it's something when I heard about it, I was like, I would play it. Yes, I would play that. So we'll see, I guess, how close we are to what other people are thinking about right now, but certainly the artwork and the theme is something I've loved to see develop. Yeah.
You worked from your own ideas. You have a theme pitched from an editor for you to develop. You have to work with great intellectual properties like Pacific Rim. Which is the way that you prefer? Getting the idea directly from your mind and putting it on the cardboard box, having the challenge of taking non-intellectual property and making something that works with it, or having the challenge to develop from a thing that an editor throws at you with no warnings.
Wow. That is a good question. I think my answer has to be, at different times in my career, different ones have been what I've needed, I think. So when I first started out, I just had all these ideas that were my ideas that I wanted to make real. But there was a certain point, it was around when I started working with Buffalo Games, where I was like, not that I was in a lull, but just kind of like, I need a new challenge. I need someone to push me a little bit And so I had this meeting with Buffalo, and they're like, that's when they pitched the summer camp idea to me. And there was a very quick turnaround on when they wanted that game to be done. So I had very few months to make a game with their theme. And it was a lot of work, but it was really like, it brought a lot of excitement back to game design for me, because I suddenly had this external voice kind of pushing me in a particular direction. And that was really exciting. So for the last few years, I've more worked in that space where themes or products have been presented and I've had to design to them. And at the moment, I'm absolutely enjoying that and loving that. However, I can also feel that I'm kind of getting to the point of exhaustion of that. And I'm sure quite soon I'll want to become a tortured artist again who says, oh, I want to make my masterpieces, leave me alone, and go off and start making completely new things again. So I think it changes over and I think a lot of designers would say this, that there are times when they want to be given challenges and work with IPs or work with themes. And there are times when they just want to dream of a game that's new and different and exciting that no one's done before and try and find a publisher for it. So I like them both. I guess is my answer.
Which game took you the longest from your first idea that you put on paper and start developing? And sometimes there are games that you start and you abandon, then you come back to them. From the final products that you end up releasing, which was the longest time from the initial idea from the final product?
Let me have a think. The longest time. Well, so yeah, Imhotep there was a 6-year lag, but that was mostly just like finding a publisher. So that kind of happens a lot where something's done, essentially done, and then it's just being hunted around, shopped around different publishers. That's a common thing, that games can take 5, even 10 years at the worst case scenario of just that happening. But in terms of one that took the longest to like finish, let me think. Let me look on my wall behind me. What is something that took a really long time? I would say definitely. Well, Gizmos is one. Gizmos is probably a good example because it came out 2018, and there was like a probably only a 2-year period of like the development of that game. But what Gizmos was an idea I had been working on literally for 10 years. So the idea was, when I got into games, one of my first big favorites, which is still a favorite, was Race for the Galaxy, San Juan, and then Race for the Galaxy. And straight away, I wanted to make a card game like those with special powers. Like many game designers want to make one of those, a tableau building special powers game. So that is literally like a 10-year, like I have notebooks going back 10 years of that idea. Like, how can I make a game where every card I get gives me new special ability in the game? And I couldn't count the number of prototypes I made and threw away. And then about 2015, 16, for whatever reason, I decided to really try and just end it. Like, I just want this out of my system. And so I happened to play a version of, I made it, but I played a version of this prototype where there were a few chain reactions happening in the powers, like this triggers this, which triggers this. And I thought, oh, maybe that's a hook I can lean into. What if that was like most of the powers, that they were chaining off each other? And that was like the key I needed to figure out Gizmos. But that was literally something I was dabbling in for at least 10 years before it became a game. So
your games, as you explained us, you take into consideration many aspects: how to teach, easy to grasp, to understand. Do you have any tips for new designers? What a good game should have?
Well, I think the biggest tip I seem to give, which seems appropriate more and more for new game designers, is something which later in your career seems so simple and obvious and a first principle. But when you're starting out, it obviously kind of it hasn't formed yet as a concept, which is really just designed to your audience. Like choose an audience, first of all, and design to that audience, which sounds so obvious it almost isn't worth saying. But when you start designing games, you're not really thinking about an audience. You are just thinking, I want to make a game. Of course, that's what you're doing. You're trying to figure out how to make a game. So whatever idea comes into your mind of the game you'd like to make, you just try and make it. And you succeed, you fail, you change, you adapt, and then you have this game. And then you try and make another game. And this is a very natural way to start. But actually, games are meant to be played by not everyone in the entire world, and not just you. They're meant to be played by each game has its audience. And being really clear from the beginning of the design who it's for, who is the target audience, and then what makes a successful game for that audience. So, for example, I think one of the reasons Sushi Go landed with Gamewright is because I literally said to so I was playing a lot of the Gamewright mass market card games, Loot and Ka-Ching and Rat-a-Tat-Cat, and I was thinking, I love that series, I love that audience. I want a card game for like 8-year-olds where their parents go, oh, I could play this too. I literally I want that line of Gamewright games. That's my order. That's what I'm doing. And so when Gamewright stumbled across it and said, we want to do it, I was like very, very happy, but also kind of like relieved in a sense. That I was like, oh, I must have hit that audience because they recognize that. And so I think that's a very broad piece of advice. And obviously there's 1,000 other things to figure out once you've got your audience and stuff. But I just think that's my biggest piece of advice. Who is this for? What does that audience want and need? And how is my design giving them what they want and what they need, hopefully in a slightly fresh way, for sure. But that's the biggest piece of advice I give. And I think for all creative people, if you're making something not just for yourself, but to put into the world, I would offer the same advice. Who is this for? Who do you want to touch with this piece of creativity? What do they need? What do they want? What makes them happy? And how can I give that to them? So that's probably the advice I give the most.
Wow, thank you.
There is a group called Minor Gaming. They have two
Quotes.
two phrases, two slogans that I like a lot. One is "We work so you can play," and the other one is "We play and call it work." The question is, do you still pick up a box of a board game, put on your table, and play as entertainment, or for you, it became your work? It is still fun for you to play.
Yeah, this is a sort of a heavy question, I think, to ask a lot of designers, because we all, at least the designers I speak to, they all have the same kind of sigh when you ask that question, which is, I wish it was the same as it was before, but it isn't. That doesn't mean I still don't love games and I still don't play games for fun, because I do. And I still get excited when new games from my favorite designers come out. I still get excited when game night rolls around. But at the same time, it isn't the same. There are times when I don't want to see a board game. There are times when I don't want to play for fun because I'm exhausted. I'm mentally exhausted. And the thought of interacting with a game is just going to make me feel exhausted or feel like I'm working. Yeah. But then there are other times where it feels fresh and new and exciting as it did before. But the reality is, I think anytime you make something your job, you bring stress and anxiety and a lot of complicated emotions into that hobby. That hobby now becomes way more fraught. So I still love games and I still play games for fun, 100%. It's just that there are times when I need to do something else. And there's something sad about that, because sometimes people ask me, oh, what are you playing at the moment? What's your favorite hot new game that you're playing? I'm like, I don't know. I've just been messing around with a few old favorites because I don't want to learn anything new at the moment, you know? Which is, there's something kind of sad about that, but at the same time, it's just the cost, I think, of the privilege of turning a hobby into your job is a great privilege, but that's the small cost on the side. That it sometimes does lose some of the freedom to just enjoy it.
It's like being a musician. You love music, you still enjoy it, but you play it all nights again and again. I can relate, I can understand. Yes.
And there's something about, like, once you know how the cake is made, so to speak, the magic is gone a little bit, in the sense that when you see a new game design, as a game designer, it's very hard to just enjoy it without analyzing it and critiquing it and picking it apart and going, what would I have done? Would I have done this? Would I have done that? Instead of just, oh, I'm enjoying this game, and not thinking about it as a game design. And I often hear from other people I know in creative fields that they feel like they can't turn off their critical voice when they engage with that field. So musicians or authors, it's like, oh, I can't just read a book anymore. I'm now analyzing it and critiquing it and comparing it to my work. And so, you know, again, this is something that, creative people just have to find the balance, I suppose.
Now, so we there are so many games to talk about. You have so many games. We just picked just some today. And now, do you have any plans? What are your plans for the future? Or any games you are working now on for the future? Or to bring some of your games to Brazil?
Well, look, I would love my games to be more... I'm like very aware that there are certain titles of mine that just aren't available in certain places. Even in Australia, there are some of my games which don't have distribution here, which feels really sad in a way. It's like, hey, this is where I live. But so much of that is just working with big publishers and their networks and their partners. And
I see.
There's not often a lot I can do in certain instances. But I always try and, like, I don't think I've ever turned down any, like, option to license a game for a new region, because I want my games to be around. But sometimes just the reality of the business side of things means certain games aren't in certain places. What I'm working on now, the main thing I'm working on now is the next game for Joey Games. So that will be announced really soon, and that's been really exciting to work on. So it's a dexterity game, which I'm really excited about, which I think I hope it is a game, again, that 6-year-olds can play and enjoy as a silly dexterity game, but adults will not have to turn their brain off, and they'll find something fun there. So that's the main thing I'm working on right now. I'm also working on untitled sci-fi game. So that will hopefully be, assuming it all goes well, will be announced later in the year. And then I have a couple of things coming out at Gen Con. 2 titles coming out at Gen Con which haven't been announced but will be announced very soon. One of those is a co-design with Eric Lang. So he's someone I met by visiting international conventions, and we got on really well. And I both think we looked at each other and went, I don't know how you do what you do. So we clicked in a really interesting way in that, we're just come from different sides of, at least, I mean, Eric's very much moved into mass market now, but when we first started working together, I thought of him as the, big fantasy fighting game guy. And I was like, oh, I want to see how his brain works. And I did. and it is an amazing organism. Anyway, so we have a game coming out at Gen Con, which will be announced soon. and I am just always working on lots of new different designs. I think we talked about before how I like to work. I think I'm leaning back in towards a phase where it's like I want to maybe slow down a little bit and work on some designs that I've had bubbling away for many years that I'd like to finally get done. So I'm hoping over the next couple of years that will happen. But yeah, sorry, I don't have any better. I don't have any
Great.
announcements. But
No.
But we are going to keep an eye on those and announcements that will come shortly. Yeah, no, that's great. It's
We know how the business works, and we know that you can't just. It's a decision from the editor to make when the game will be announced. But it's good to know that you are working in those games, in the sci-fi game that I was hoping to come one day. And I will make you a question that we always ask our guests. We always ask to the people we interview here. It's a simple question, but I think it's a fun question. We have a concept in our channel that is games that fill in the pocket. It's a game that fills in your pocket because it's a small game or because it's a cheap game that you can buy and bring with you. We would like you to name us 3 games that fills in your pocket that you like to have with you. It can be a small game or a cheap game.
Okay. That's one of my favorite genres of game, things that can fit in your pocket. One would be, it's probably a bit big for your pocket, but Next Station London.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a game. So my friend Matthew Dunstan designed, and I don't know how he did it. I think it's an amazing achievement in that it's just a really simple game of drawing lines, but you end up with something that actually looks like a subway map and is completely addicting. So I've been playing that a lot lately. Another one would be Reiner Knizia's Crisscross. So this is a tiny little roll and write by Knizia, which is almost, it would have to be one of the simplest roll and writes that exist. And I totally get that someone could play this once and say, and move on and never think about it again. But I think I've played it 50 times, and I think it is a bit of a gem in that it is such a simple, like, I don't know if you could get a simpler one, right? And yet it has got some really fun, agonizing decisions as you fill in this little grid of shapes. So that's a very small box. So that would be one. What would another one be? Oh, I know another one. I love the Oink Games line, the very small Oink boxes. And I think my favorite one of those is actually Deep Sea Adventure is great, but my favorite is A Fake Artist Goes to New York, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is, Pictionary, a drawing game, but with hidden roles. And whoever, wherever that idea came from for the designer, I don't know, but I think it's absolutely genius and always a fun time. And I so appreciate they managed to somehow put it in a box the size of, a pocket. So that would be my 3 picks.
Nice. One of them to me is the archaeology. It's okay, where is the treasure? Oops, the sand covered it. I love it. I love that one.
You are a very nice person to talk with. It was great to know your process, to know the brain that gave us these fantastic games. So we would like to thank you for your time.
My pleasure. It was lovely talking to you. And if you're ever at any conventions and you see that I'm there, please come and say hello. I wish I could travel more around the world than I do, but I'm only occasionally overseas. But yeah, it would be lovely to meet sometime.
E aqui temos o incrível Phil Walker Harding, cara, que fez esses jogos e muitos outros que nós temos aqui no Brasil, no mundo inteiro. Fantásticos jogos. Né, LP? Fantásticos. Em breve vamos ter mais notícias. Thank you very much. I will close here. Okay, now it's over. It's ended.